Good afternoon, everyone. Are we okay, Sue? Are we live? Thank you. All right, I declare this Finance, Audit and Risk Committee meeting open and call for apologies.
We have an apology from Councillor Ketu.
Thank you. Can I have a mover for, thank you, Councillor Mayor Burney, and seconded, thank you, Councillor Sam. And it's not an apology, but welcome back to the new mum. Welcome back, Councillor Pitahira. Nice to see you back. Now, public participation. Before we begin, we've got a number of people who want to speak on public participation, and I think it's important that we just reiterate the purpose of public participation. Public participation relates to specific items on the agenda to help the elected members understand the decision or the information that needs to be received. And as we have a significant number today, I will actually, as chair, if people then start using this as a general forum for other issues, I will call that to order and ask that person to speak only to the issue that's in front of them, rather than it being an open forum for anything that's almost unrelated to the item on the agenda. I just want to make that clear to everyone before we start today. I think there's been some confusion as to the purpose of public participation, and I think it's important that I emphasise that as chair. So our first speaker is Charles Rudd on 7.4 Internal Audit Report, so 7.2, page 34. Mr. Rudd.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, governance, operations, and members of the public. Kia ora tātou. Our introduction. My name is Tare Ika. Translated means Charles Rudd. I'm a direct descendant of 3 paramount chiefs of 3 different tribes. Right? My son stayed with the Māori Queen. I have relations with people of Ratana Church and Ratana itself. I have whānau and am related to Rangatana ki Manawatu, Ngāti Rokua ki Te Tonga, Te Atiawa of Waikanai, Ngāti Tō ki Porua. Those are my whānaus and all those things. And as well as others. I am also Maupoko. I'm also of Taranaki Tuturu. Okay? I am a tuakana. I am an ahika of the Horowhenua district, if you understand those Māori words. That's what I am. Right. Getting on to the speaking things. Judge the past, measuring the present. What will be, we will see in the future. Number 6, iwi partnership, pages 36 to 38. And Mr. Chairman, I understand what you said completely on the issues. But back into the past, at 2 different points of time, I spoke to Horowhenua District Council government under Mayors Brendan Duffy and Michael Fane. I asked the question as why is in the HDC finance it is not shown in what the council gives to certain Maori, except what is shown through the public funding process, ratepayers and taxpayers' money. Okay? Because that's what you're talking about now in financials. Financial inducements are given to certain Maori behind closed doors, of which general public and hapu and tribal Maori are excluded about such handout deals. Right? Money and in-kind deals are given out to the certain amount under the guise of MOUs, MOPs and CIAs, Cultural Impact Assessment Reports, and possibly others. This type of handout to certain marriage I would class as racism and class distinction. Because I know there are European families and others out there, they can't say these things what I am saying because they'll be called, maybe called racist. But I will say it as being part Māori. It pits Māori against Māori, the public against the public, and similar to the Taranaki land wars to divide and conquer, divide and rule. Cultural impact assessment reports can be used as an inducement to certain areas for the continuation of pollutions and contamination of the natural environment. So where is the social, cultural, economic and well-being standards in what I am saying? So for council I say, wake up, stand up and smell the purr to what is going on in this district. Kia ora tātou.
Assume there's no questions or points of clarification required. Thank you.
Because what you're saying is, like when you're talking about Ihiwi, those people down there, you're going into the past of financials in the past of what was given out for MOVs, right? There is no up-to-date standard of what's going on and whatever. And as I speak for most people here, there's a copy given out to you people from Vivian Toki's legal advisors. Control authority does not represent the local people. It's a legal thing that these councils are going to apply.
Thank you, Mr. Rudd. Our next speaker is Vivian Bold. Thank you, Vivian.
Sorry, I'm just a bit short. Okay, I'm trying to make this so that it actually is not a statement and more of a question, okay? I'm going to speak on a few of the pages. First one's page 18, which is the Horowhenua New Zealand Trust. For a while now, I've been trying to ask this question of you, but it doesn't seem to be going through, and Mr. Clacton's never got back to me. Now, about, I think it was July, might have been 2020, 2029, I think it's 2019 actually, sorry. We've spoke lots of times about the Rose Street properties, okay? But actually in that deal there were 3 properties, 2 Rose Streets of 7 acres, and then there were 7 hectares at 72 Cambridge Street South. I know this because I put a bid on it, okay? But I came back, Mr. Higgy came back to me and said that they want to sell all 3 properties together and not separately. So never has it been addressed where the 72 Cambridge Street South went to and how much the council has shown up in the books of. So privately I feel the ratepayers base this trust, the public have seen very little from the investments it gets. Page 62, the Roslyn Road upgrade. This 6-month development is another ratepayer expense. And yet on page 109, the reference is given to $1.6 million funded externally by the Three Waters Fund, probably for the pipes. Why I mentioned the Roslyn Street Road, because it is going to have a huge impact on especially the rural sector because of the runoff that is coming through from the developments. Everywhere there is a house and concrete put up, there is less absorption for the rain to pour off into. Page 78. This is the first written evidence we have seen for a very long time of the building consents and trends that are happening in the Horowhenua. It says from March 2020 to March 21, which is a whole year, fair enough. But in the last written agenda where we actually got the evidence of how many consents we had and how much land divided was in January 2020. which is very sad because I feel our records should show what is happening within our area. The big ones we used to get at the end of the agenda have all disappeared in 2019. Page 112. What is the outcome, sir, of these swaps with interest rates when the council don't even pay off the debt? We saw it in the internal audit, and for once we actually have seen somebody else say the same thing we're thinking. Intergenerational debt through borrowings instead of development contributions. Any questions from anybody? Any councillors? Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mr. Lewis, thank you.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. My name is Kariana Tawhena. I am from Manukau. My tribe is Ngāti Wihi. I've read the CKS audit. It was part of this summary, executive summary, on pages 35 to 37. I learned for the first time that our tribe, Te Kōtahitanga o Te Iwi, Ngāti Wihi, has been meeting with council every 3 months since at least 2013 to advance a works program that we or Wihi did not know anything of. Never been discussed at any of our monthly meetings that I regularly attend. The auditor report also says that the completion dates of this project were not sure whether they were projects whether they were target completion dates or actual completion dates of those projects that they were doing with council. I'm also disturbed to learn not only how much communication and discussion there has been between our marae and the council over these years, but also how the lax of the council has been in its documentation of the meetings that have taken place every 3 months since 2013. No supporting papers located. Has the headings, minutes, but no content. Document has the appearance of a template to be filled later on. Supporting papers mentioned more than once. Surely the council should know how to take minutes and follow these correct procedures of these matters. Why weren't minutes taken? What was being talked about that could not be committed to paper and recorded? My ability to gain access to the minutes of the meetings held between council and marae is therefore limited. Due to meetings between the council and my marae have anything to do with the council's large land and property development plans for Manukau, included in the council's Growth 2040 plan. I am seeking answers to these questions before I proceed with my injunction in the Māori Land Court. The Marae trustees have responsibilities and obligations under the Māori Reservation Act 1994 to represent the interests of the people of Wehi. This does not give my marae the license to make deals with the council. This audit demonstrates the council has fallen woefully short of the mark in terms of making minutes of the meetings. Surely copies of these minutes should be submitted at least to the Māori Land Court. What has the council been doing, having 3 monthly meetings with trustees about for the last 8 years? What is the work program between the council and Te Kotahitanga o Te Iwi o Ngāti Wewe? These are the questions I have of the council. Thank you.
So through you, Your Chair, this needs a response, if that's okay. Okay, so acknowledge the presentation that's been made by Mr. Lewis, I think it is Mr. Lewis? So to my right is the recognition of the signing of the Memorandum of Partnership between Ngāti Wehi and Council. It's recognised on the photograph just on the pillar at the end of the building. So that was signed in 2012. At the time, the trustees were led by the late Richard Ozeki from Wehi, and we worked very, very hard to develop a means of actually developing that partnership between Council and Wehi. And at the time, yes, there were regular meetings held, and there were minutes that were taken, and I'm happy to actually share those minutes. When Richard passed, unfortunately, it was taken. The mantle was taken over by Bob Miritana, and we worked with Bob and his team at the time to continue the momentum that Richard had started back in 2012. In latter years, we haven't had those regular meetings, partly, I think, due to the personnel that were available from Wehi to actually meet with us, and I can't recall the last meeting that we actually had where minutes were taken, so it's probably more than 2 years since we've actually met, but that was partly due to the resourcing that was available at Wehi. I'm actually happy to meet with the Speaker to talk through with him the concerns that have been raised, but I think there needs to be a perspective put to this in terms of where we've come from back in 2012 to where we are at the moment. But as I say, I'm happy to actually meet with the Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Can you just turn this out to the next thing? Thanks. So, next speaker is Mr. Lindsay.
I've got that this time, Bernie. Thank you. I wish to highlight 7 areas of concern in the FAR agenda. 1, the internal audit report for this year is the year ending June 30th, 2019. It's approximately 2 years out of date. So the question is, when can we expect the current financial year audit report? The details, therefore, are somewhat out of date. 2, the introduction on page 21 presents a statement of information being withheld from public access without going into details. Ratepayers would expect to have an indication of what information is being withheld, allowing its access, accountability and transparency. 3, page 35, iwi partnerships. Annual payments to provide financial contributions for some management groups for, quote, fees for service, could well extend to other groups that service the community's needs. This is a feature of fiduciary relationship between HDC and all ratepayers, which I believe needs to be respected. The courts in Paki William Young Justice observed the courts are obliged to limit the ability of local council authorities to use ratepayer funds to subsidise services. So again, we believe that this is an extension of fiduciary duty where we seek to balance fairly payments between different groups, different categories of ratepayers. 4, subdivision consents approved, as showing on page 81, shows that there's been an increased number of subdivisions each year. Ratepayers Association reported a loss of $21 million approximately through having no development contributions. This figure at that forum was contested by 2 councillors. Subsequent discussions with the Chief Financial Officer show the figure is substantially correct within a 95 to 99% confidence level. Number 5, the North East Live-In upgrade. I note that the consent to discharge stormwater has not been granted for this development. What is the governance group, people sitting around the table here, doing to prevent double standards existing where private contractors cannot proceed without building consent approval, yet all the while council, the public contractors, carry out unconsented work in this area? Further, the 290 metres of the 150mm drainage along Roslyn Road connects with one buried in a private subdivision, which in the future may be extended back towards Kennedy Drive, I was told by the developer. Ratepayers are paying for the mitigation of bad decisions a long time ago. We need to be cognizant of that. But again, it's already been mentioned on page 109, suggesting that additional forecasting of $1.6 million is going to be hopefully paid from the Three Waters Stimulation Fund, which currently doesn't exist, and this highlights a proposal of future development which is actually not present in the long-term plan. There's a bit of a conflict there. Capital expenditure, page 108. We note that by the end of the financial year you expect to spend more than budgeted on the capital expenditure. The graph shows a summary of the so far underspending to year to date. So the question is that due to a lack of planning or a lack of contractors allowing the work to proceed? Good work in getting it done, that's the main thing. The document Water New Zealand shows that Horowitz number 7, document Water New Zealand Appendix 1 shows Horowitz District Council, quote, mostly completed, end quote, data, however, quote, audit queries were not returned, end quote. The data provided is among the lowest provided of all the service authorities. Is it acceptable to the governance group of councillors? Is that acceptable that we are not returning information which is required? Further, and this is a fun little bit, the volume of printing could be reduced. Instead of providing graphs on a one-page landscape sign, to put 2 on a page, and that would reduce the cost from about $6 to $3. So that might not seem much, but it's my money and other people's money they're spending. So replies to this would be welcome, now or later, and thank you for your time and consideration.
Can I suggest that we obtain a copy of Mr. Lindsay's presentation so we can have a look at it? I mean, that's a lot of information that you've ripped through there.
Yeah.
And it'd be great if we could have a copy of the presentation, please. Get some answers. Well, I think all councils, not just me, all councils, I think we'll definitely appreciate that.
I've
very
read
hard
copies,
to,
so
yeah. Be great if we could have a look at it. Thank you.
the question then becomes, should I send it to you earlier? So once I've got speaking rights, I can send it through. To all
Well, what I'm
councillors.
saying, Mr. Lindsay, is that you've rattled off a lot of stuff there, which is great.
Yeah.
Great. Good to hear it. But yeah, we'd like to see some if you could provide us with a copy while you're doing that, it would be helpful.
Okay.
And then hopefully the officers can get some replies back to you that we are aware of. So that's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thanks for that feedback.
Are there any more questions? Through you, Chair, I just need to respond to one item because it's actually been raised twice, but one by Mrs. Bold and now by Mr. Lindsay, and that's in relation to the $1.6 million that is available through the Three Water Stimulus Fund to complete some of the work down Roslyn Road. The fact is, and we have actually conveyed this a number of times through this council, that we received $4.38 million in the stage 1 of the Three Water Stimulus Fund package, and of that 4.38 we've allocated, I think it's a little over $1.6 million to this particular project. So that has been well distributed in terms of the information. So I just want to correct that the funding has been received through government, and it's out of the total $4.38 million that we've received.
Thanks for that.
Mr. Lindsay, just a point of clarification. I think it was item number 2 where you referred to page 21, and there was some reference to some information that you thought was not being supplied publicly. Can I just get you to clarify what your point was on that?
Yeah, the first paragraph, it's our understanding that HDFC considered there were sufficient good reasons under the Local Government Innovation Act to enable information pertaining to this review to be withheld from public access. So the question is, which part of this information is not there?
I think I can clarify that, or did you want me to?
Yep. Thank you very much.
Christina Payton is our last speaker. Thank you, Christina.
Good afternoon. I'm referring to item 7.10, the 9-month report, 1st of July 2020 to the 31st of March 2021. Community facilities activity, and please refer to the final paragraph. This is in your agenda. Final paragraph on page 110, Foxton Beach Wharf project. And I quote, "Within this activity, there is also additional expenditure planned for the Foxton Beach Wharf project. This will be partially funded by the Department of Conservation and by the Foxton Beach freeholding account. This project will be completed in early 2021-22, end of quote." That statement about funding coming from DOC is untrue. I have spoken to DOC today, and they have assured me they will not be contributing any money. Please refer to the attachments supplied by me, and I know Karen will give you all a copy. Please refer to the attachments supplied by me, which is a copy of an article that was printed in the Manawatu Standard, March the 5th, 2021. It is stated in that article that DOC is refusing to pay
for repairs to the Foxton Beach Wharf. HDC's statement also does not match with the information supplied in the Foxton Community Board agenda of 19 April 2021, and I refer you to the Chairperson's report to the 19th of April 2021, page 12. Foxton Beach Wharf Progress Update. And it states, the western end of the wharf requires repair. Hang on to that word repair, please. To prevent further erosion, and Council has assessed a range of repair options. Further, it states, Council has established an agreement with DOC under the provisions of the Conservation Act 1987 for the authorisation, not the funding, for the authorisation of the proposed repair work. It is not stated in any of your documents with detail that DOC is contributing financially. If they're contributing at all, it will be by way of discussion that came out of the conversation I had with DOC this afternoon. I have attended Manawatu Estuary Management Team meetings where DOC has repeatedly stated that they will not be paying for the Foxton Beach Wharf. This afternoon they stressed to me again it does not meet the requirements of the Coastal Policy Statement. Further, Horizons has confirmed the proposed work as a permitted activity under the One Plan rule for a maintenance activity, not for a capital works activity, for a maintenance activity. Further, the Foxton Beach Freeholding Account Strategy and Policy, dated the 7th of October 2009 on page 9, states, the fund will be used for capital works only on existing and future infrastructure. The fund will, and this is still part of the policy, the fund will not be used for operating or maintenance costs of existing infrastructure, which will be funded from rates or other revenue sources. Now that is your own document, your own policy. I'm not making any of this up. I'm quoting directly from your own documents. As elected mayor and councillors, you must use current policies to determine your decisions. You can't make up stuff as you go along. That's illegal. What exactly is it that you do not understand about interpreting the difference between capital works and maintenance and or repairs? In addition, the Foxton Beach Wharf is not mentioned at all in Appendix A of the Foxton Beach Freeholding Account Strategy and Policy. That Appendix A contains the Horowhenua Development Plan, which includes the components for the Foxton Beach Development Plan. I bet you haven't read it. The executive summary contained in this FAR agenda, dated 28 April 2021, has already pointed out there are gaps in the supply of information, and in my view, there is also a significant gap in your interpretation of the Foxton Beach Freeholding Account Strategy and Policy. You cannot make it up as you go along. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just clarify? I think it's really important that council can go outside of its own policy. It's not illegal. The process is that council must acknowledge that it is going outside of policy, and it's got two options. It can actually say, we think the policy is wrong, we're going to change it, or this is a one-off exception to the policy, because a policy can't cover every eventuality that you anticipate. That is generally accepted in law and also accepted by audit. The issue is you've got to note that you're going outside of policy. There might be other.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I am going to acknowledge that Mrs. Payton is right around the wording on the Department of Conservation. That's actually incorrect. Sorry, Mrs. Payton's right, we are wrong. The wording should be key stakeholders. The Department of Conservation are not funding any of the work associated with the Foxton Wharf, and I'd just like to apologise to Doc and also to to Mrs. Patton for that error. But it should read key stakeholders. There are other parties that are contributing funding to this project. The second point that I just wanted to cover was the interpretation around repair and renewal was covered at the last meeting, and I still stand by that discussion that we had last time. There might be a difference in interpretation around wording between different councils. Maintenance under the Horizons framework and the word around renewal under the HDC framework. But I stand by what I said at the last meeting. This is a renewal project on the Foxton Wharf.
Thank you. Well, one comment that DOC did actually contribute funding to this project. They funded the first report from Token and Taylor that gave a repair solution, a number of repair options to the Wharf that's been funded by the Boat Club, I understand. And that's that finance that sat with council from when the initial work was done, that took the old derelict wharf away that was the DOC ordered to be taken away. That has caused the problems now. They did fund the initial report, so just put that on the table. But my question is, Mr. Payton, and you bring up the policy, and you're well aware that the policy is being identified by Community Board to be not now fit for purpose. And I note the comments of Mr. Jones and the CE. You know the policy is changing. Well, my question to you is, what should council do with that high valued area? Should we just let it erode because the policy doesn't quite fit? What should we do with that? Because I tell you now, the community are demanding for a solution. So, yeah, we can't win. So give me your thoughts on that. I've heard it a number of times.
I think you should get your heads around the coastal policy statement and see what you can do with that first. And also speak
It's not answering my question. I'm asking you, what should council do? What's the solution?
Told you. I've just told you. Get your head around. Get your head around the coastal policy statement.
Thank you.
Now, are you going to tell me, Mr. Chair, that coastal policy statement has no grip either because it's got the word policy in it?
No, I'm saying it's not our policy. That's Horizons policy. I think there are other people who want to make a comment. I think we've had that discussion. We just need to move on. Mr. Jackson, you've got a comment?
I haven't actually got a comment, Chairman, but I have got some advice for Christina Patton. My advice as an independent on this council, and looking and working with some really decent people that sit around the table and in management, that in future, if you took perhaps a slightly less aggressive tone, you would get far better results.
I hope you're listening to yourself.
Thank you. Right. Thank you, Councillor Jennings.
Chair, just a clarification question, please, Mrs. Payton. So can I just understand your point that you made around Horizons and the One Plan? Are you suggesting that based on the discussion at the last council meeting where the Chief Executive advised that this was to be considered a renewal as opposed to a repair, are you suggesting that that because of that classification as a renewal, that it wouldn't be a permitted activity under the the one plan. Is that what you're suggesting?
I haven't gone into the detail of the Horizons One Plan rule, but I did note that the conversation that this council had with Horizons was to do with repair, not a capital work. And whether they have another rule or not that deals with capital works, you need to find that out. Just make sure that you watch your backs as to where you're getting your funding from, that's all, because eventually the audit department will catch up.
Can I just speak? I think that it's actually coming down to bean counter interpretation. Once upon a time, in the dim dark ages, unless you were building something brand new, it was deemed capital. And then in about 1998-99, when you were substantially rehabilitating an existing asset, the accounting standard then required you to treat that as capital under the classification of renewal. And I don't want to bore you with accounting technicalities, but a renewal is a replacement of an existing asset to its original size and condition. So some people might interpret that as a repair, but the bean counters would probably treat that as a renewal, and a renewal is capital. So that's the technicalities from an accounting treatment. If you look at, and I just don't want to bore you too long, but sometimes you actually might do a repair to your car, but if it was a substantial asset, like an aeroplane, it might be actually a renewal. So that's, there are nuances in the word repair and renewal that can mean different things to different people. I hope that helps, or might muddy the waters even further.
Yes, thank you, because I can see there is confusion in trying to get money out of the freeholding fund, and the policy is not helpful. That particular policy is not helpful.
Thank you for your presentation. So if we go back to the agenda, I understand there are no late items. Are there any declarations of conflicts of interest for items on the agenda? There are none. Confirmation of the minutes held. Sorry? Oh.
So just in relation to declarations of interest, just in relation to item 21/157 on page 15, recommendation 2.3, just consistent with my previous declarations of interest, I will be declaring interest in relation to that matter.
Okay, thank you. Confirmation of the minutes held 31st of March, both open and public excluded. Moved Councillor David, seconded Member Brian. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Announcements. I'm not aware of any announcements. First item on the agenda, 7.1, Health and Safety Report. Thank you, Lisa and Tanya. We'll take the report as read. If there's any additional information or key issues you would like to, or further information, you can circulate that now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. I do have extra item that is just coming round, which is a clarification of pages 9 to 11, the critical risks. The page going round now is the full scope of the risks that are presented in the report. After a meeting with yourself, we had a discussion to give more information around that and how we get to our critical risks and where they sit.
And the only other new piece of information is that we have received the draft report from the Safe Plus audit. So this is under the key highlights, and we will be replying to that by the end of this week to expect a full report next month. Any questions?
I think it's just important just for councillors, just if you just explain, maybe take one risk and just go across the top of the page and just explain how to interpret. This would be quite useful since it's just been literally, unfortunately, put on the desk, but I think it gives, or it helped me when I saw it, understand how the critical risks were assessed and what was being done.
No problem. So this critical risk register is for staff to use to assess risks within their positions, their job and their team. If we take the contractors and subcontractors, so we use these contractors to complete work for the council, and there are risks involved there. So they could have an incident. If it's severe enough, then WorkSafe will be involved in that situation. I complete a pre-qualification of their health and safety systems, which ensures me that they have looked at health and safety for their business and what they complete. And so that has different levels, from a contractor coming in and, for example, putting in a light in an office space, or one working out on the street doing work outside in a lamppost. So their health and safety will be different. We have a look at what their likelihood of ratings are for the work that they are going to be doing. Give them a severity. We use consequence and likelihood to allow us to see where we believe their setting is on risk for the council, and we want to minimise whatever that risk may be. So we pre-qualify the contractors. We have contract managers, that's our staff, have relationships with their contractors, discuss the work, the type of risks and hazards that may be around the work that we are requiring them to do. And they also complete an induction if it is a new work site or a new piece of work that hasn't happened before. The contract manager or myself, or both of us, go out and induct onto site. And then there can be a spot audit or a review of the work completed to ensure that it is to the standard that's required. And then the areas around responsibility, the contract manager and myself, we look at the critical risks annually, or if they come up, a new hazard may arrive, a new risk may be identified, we will deal with that as that comes up. Staff are able to refer to documentation within our system to support them when working with contractors, and then there is around the date that it was identified, when it's reviewed, and where it sits once we have the controls in place of that.
Thank you, Tony. Any questions of either the table or the report? If you did, Dave.
Just on the table document, people behaviour and the risks identified under that, abuse of people, etc. The generic hazards, do they match up?
Excuse me, the box, it does have all of that, because that's where, this was just a reduced copy of this, so yes, it does have all of those. Yeah, I do apologise.
Yeah, just
Clarification, please. So take the contractors and subcontractors hazard, and we've got a risk rating overall with no controls in place is significant. And we go to the right-hand side, now we have a risk rating with controls in place, and the risk rating is still significant. Is that correct? So it hasn't reduced with controls in place?
In the last review, no, it hadn't reduced. It's still quite a high risk area. There's situations of trusters being required to ensure that the contractors are doing what they say they're doing and how they are approaching their health and safety. So it's one of those areas in an overall sense that is quite high. So it hasn't reduced.
So over time, if you don't get accidents in that area, will you then change the risk rating with the controls in place?
That could be possible, or there might be improvements in tools or equipment that will help reduce extra training. It depends. This is sort of the overarching and the critical risks. Within the risk register is much more broken down to fit the team and the work that's been done. So that allows for a bit more movement. But if there isn't significant movement in allowing the risk to reduce through just not reporting, the risk is probably still there, even if an accident hasn't happened within that area.
Any other questions of either Tanya or Lisa? Thank you, ladies. If I can have a mover for the recommendation on page 7. Thank you, Councillor Sam. Seconded. Thank you, Councillor Ross. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Next item is our internal report, item 7.2, page 15 onwards. Nikki and Rachel, thank you. Welcome, Rachel. I think we're still going to make your plane, are we? You're still going to make your flight tonight? Oh, yes? Just letting you know I hadn't forgotten.
Thank you.
I think we can take the report as read, and I think councillors have seen a very early draft. I think the issue is maybe Rachel just talk about the key issues, or any additional information would be useful, and then questions from elected members. Thank you.
The report that's been tabled today is, as it says in the introductory document, is 99.99% the same as the one that was tabled at the meeting in March. But I understand that there's been a number of questions regarding the first paragraph, so I thought I just might speak briefly about how the report is developed. Because when you do a procurement audit, and indeed other audits, a lot of the information that you're accessing is information that's been covered in committee. So, for example, various approvals by council, other committees, and so on. You look at tenders and things. There's a lot of information that's confidentially commercial, and there's also some that comes in privacy. So, under the Local Government Act, etc., some of that is confidential. And we always, because we know the report is a compilation of many, many pages of documentation. So to ensure that nothing that is confidential ends up in the public arena, we put this paragraph in here at the start. And this committee have reviewed this report. It's been looked at by the senior leadership team. And after the draft was looked at, it was considered that there was no information that was held in the report that required the report to remain confidential. So that paragraph is actually my error. It should have been taken out of the final version. So there's nothing in there that wasn't already considered confidential under the LGRMIA, usually in the case of a procurement report to do with either commercial confidentiality or privacy. So there is nothing missing from that report that you hadn't already considered was a confidential matter. So if anyone wants to ask any more questions about that or a bit about the process, then it's probably just as easy that I answer them now.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Rachel or even Nikki?
So aside from that, because this is the same report as was at the draft meeting, I don't have any additional matters to add, unless again anyone's got any questions that have come up since March.
I have some questions, and that's probably because I wasn't at the March in committee meeting. So apologies, maybe you want me to just leave it alone, but I've asked actually 3 other councillors how much discussion went on during that meeting, what did I miss out on, and I got very little, like, oh, no, not a lot. Okay, so you're giving me permission, thank you. Right. So, okay. So I'm pleased, first of all, that it's been done, and I recall actually Councillor Mitchell raising internal controls as a point of interest for us because we are responsible for those internal controls, and this is delved a little bit deeper than what we're used to or what I've seen in the past. And specifically some of the points I want to pick up on. So I'm scrolling through. So there's obviously the scope in which you did the review and things that were left out. I was going to raise the Te Kōtahitanga and how you, was that just a random selection, you picked 2 of the 4, and then how much do you engage with them, or is this just the council side of documentation? You don't look at the relationship. I guess, yeah, that's the first thing. And why I say it is because from a whilst you say that this is no longer commercial, you know, you can put this stuff in the public arena. It does, like the speaker mentioned, divides, you know, causes some, which I'm not looking forward to later, but it's, you know, there's a category thing here where it's low, complex, and they're all over 30,000, and I mean you're looking at a $10,000 or $20,000 partnership memorandum, and you know I don't take that lightly because you know then that's all public money. Fair enough. Got to be accountable for the dollar, people's hard-earned money, but again, putting that, I just, I don't know, it's a courtesy thing. I mean, I would have liked to have, at least at our end, somebody invite them at the meeting where we're talking about them. Like, Māori do things face to face, right? And like, to have them on here, where others are going to talk about them, or we're going to talk about them, none of them here to speak for themselves. I just have a little bit of an issue with that, but maybe it's not your... Anyway, there's some recommendations and management comments, and I'll just pick the waste one, solid waste. Oh, sorry, that's page 26, 27. We talk about the recycling, depreciation of trucks and why things are beyond the time, usual time guidelines, conflicts of interest, like from one member of the evaluation team, and this is all, these are all triggers for me because, you know, in another space we're talking about solid waste activity and a upcoming potential procurement, and no one in that group should have a conflict of interest. If that's the case, they should not be on that group. And so I feel like we're repeating mistakes if this is still going on. And the reporting back, I mean, in that meeting we identified a lack of supervision on our solid waste activity over there, and here it is again, performance, and then the management comment is we'll have a discussion later, and those expectations of ratification will come back. Well, when? Oh, I can't see when. Yeah, at the time of writing, documentation not provided on 1, 2, 3 bullet points. I guess without going through the whole thing, which I'm a bit shocked, and I'll take ownership of some of that, because that does date back to 2013. You know, I was here then, and I feel like, gosh, I haven't done very well in the monitoring space. Or have we? But I didn't see this much before. So I'm going to apologise publicly, because it's not a good look, just telling it like it is. And overall, I must say, here's a positive. That National Waters document, that's attached to this report, I don't know, it's 45 pages or whatever, full of those graphs. Yes, we printed colour. It's good, I like graphs. It was very telling that we're not too bad, actually. We kind of hover around the median mark of all those things. We do quite well when it comes to the complaints. Auckland's the highest, Rotorua second. I think Victoria picked up on that as well. So we are doing some good things, and we don't have the PNCC problem. That's Palmerston City Council of a $300 to $400 million crisis on their wastewater. But yeah, this was a good review, but a not so good review, and we need to dot the I's, cross the T's, not be very... Look, we've got great officers, but some of this is clearly not happening. So, please, and thank you. That's all I have to say.
Nikki, do you want to just comment on, some of those comments there about the process, particularly around what's been done since the report, or Rachel? I think that's probably quite important, just to give council some confidence that the items that have been addressed are being addressed or have been addressed.
If I may, Chair, I'll just comment a little bit first to help explain the process. So, for example, we refer to low-value procurements, simple procurements, etc. What we're actually reviewing against is council's policies and procedures. So that's actually the way that council at that time, and possibly still do, divide up their procurement categories. So a lot of those things are, this is what council believes is the best process to use, and we're looking to see if they do it. So exactly as you were saying, are the I's being dotted and the T's being crossed. In terms of scoping and selecting the stratum, obviously this is discussed with various members of the leadership team. You look at an organisation, and you look at how the money's being spent in this particular case, and then you divvy it up into different types of areas. So it's not just about the amounts, it's also about the sorts of things. So for example, there's a section there on staff purchases, which is a very, very small amount, but it is actually a unique type of expenditure. So in terms of any partnerships and things like that, that's an area, there's an area, there's an area, here's the big grunty ones, the over millions and so on, and we divide it up. And then in terms of who gets selected, it depends on the size of the sample. If there's only 2 or 3 and all over $1 million, we'll do all of them. And that's around materiality. If one of those goes wrong, that's a big chunk of public money. In terms of the 4 partnerships, it was a random selection. It was just like, here's 4, toss a coin, this is one and this one. And a lot of the selections are done randomly, although you always try and get a representative sample. So if, say, for example, you were reviewing planting programs or fencing programs, as well as doing it randomly, you'll also look at some of the amounts, so you want to get the big ones again, but you'll also look at the areas and possibly the contractors. And the idea is to get the biggest spread that you possibly can of all the activity. And that's whether it's payments, receipts, motor vehicle, whatever's, anything. So that's just the standard process to get a random sample, but also to make sure that you gather all the different types of stratum. So I hope that helps with how the full partnerships come in there and how those two got selected. In terms of the decision as to whether or not it comes out of committee, it's a decision for council, not for the internal auditor. And there was another thing you mentioned that I thought I might be able to say something helpful about. In terms of not being able to locate documents, again, it's not necessarily that they don't exist, it just means that at the point in time when the audit was closed off and a draft report was requested, they had not yet been located. And again, around the dotting of I's and the crossing of T's, organisations, and I'm talking generally now, not about council specifically, tend to develop policies, and to be honest, central government have a habit of doing this if you do a lot of work in the charity space and things. They will develop various types of to not tick all those boxes and cross those T's, because, well, going back to when I was on a sports body, to actually comply with the requirements for getting the funding for our sports people would actually cost us more than getting the funding. So, we actually renegotiated around the amount of reviewing we had to do. So it's not, so I hope that helps a wee bit.
Working? Okay. Yeah, I read all of that. But I guess we have these policies or guidelines for procurement and all manner of things. But in and out, is that right? Okay. We expect the public, whether it be a resource consent or just anything, or if they're applying for a grant, which is $200, we're all tight around criteria and what they have to do, what they have to produce, provide to us to get that, or for it to be approved, and turn it around on us and okay, we didn't do that, or we can fix that next time. So can't have double standards. It's okay for us, not okay for the person out there.
No, I understand perfectly what you're saying, and I totally agree that you should never have double standards, whether it's from central government, the United Nations, right down to small groups. I'm very, very rigid on those matters. But it is nevertheless, it does happen that policies are developed where you end up with this is an organisation that's not even anywhere, not even the North Island, to be honest, where they'd actually developed a policy around leave that was so onerous that not one single person, not one manager, not even the chief executive in that organisation was following it. So clearly in those situations, it's prudent to look at the policy and say, how can we achieve our control objectives, but make it manageable for the practicalities of the workplace. So I do agree with you, but sometimes things can get a tiny bit out of balance in our view when we're auditing. And at the end of the day, there's something like an easy one, cash handling. An auditor will always tell you should have 2 counters for cash handling, the first one and the second one, and they should sign in evidence in writing that they've done those checks. But if you've got a facility whereby there's only one person there, then by definition you cannot practically get a second person to count on the day at the time that the cash is counted. So an auditor will always recommend a double count because that is good practice, it's the best practice, and we'll always do it. But nevertheless, it's highly improbable that the organisation, whoever it is, will ever introduce that control. They'll try and have other controls. So that's, again, a lot of it's about balance.
Chair, if I may, just one last, very short, and I'll end well. So you've done a great job, thank you very much. And local government is a beast. It's huge. We've got moving parts where, every department or activity, what do you want to call it, there's a lot that goes on that the public don't see. And for the most part, we're doing You know, what I hope is a good job, but we can do better, is my point. And we should want that for our community. Ideally, we wouldn't be here because it's just a job. We'd be here because, you know, we want to make a difference. And yeah, just on and up. What is it? Good's great. Yeah. So through you, Chair, now to add the response from what you've requested of me. Acknowledge your points, Councillor, and I think essentially what you're saying is the recommendations that have been made, you want to see that we're addressing those recommendations, and you want to be able to monitor as council that those have been completed, and in any of those recommendations where it's identified other areas of improvement, what we're doing about that to ensure it doesn't happen again. So in the prior discussion of the committee that was in committee, one of the actions that came out of that was to develop a monitoring report of all of the recommendations of the auditor, and that was to come to this committee quarterly. So I have already developed that. So this here, you'll be familiar with this format. It's the format of the Audit New Zealand monitoring reports, where I've already created that so that it can come back to the committee. So that incorporates all of the recommendations of the auditor, the status that was applied by the auditor. So in the in-committee discussion, it talked about whether it was something that was urgent, priority, necessary, beneficial. So that's captured in the monitoring report. And then a status and a comment as that progresses that you would receive, and at a point that those are completed, agree that they're completed and they come off. So I just want to ensure that it is clarified that this will absolutely be monitored to ensure that essentially what you are pointing out is covered off, and ensure that we are not only addressing what's been identified, but actually having processes in place to ensure that we're protecting that for the future as well.
Thank you. We've just sort of been having a little discussion about why this is to the end of June 2019, and taking into account Mr. Lindsay's comments that he thought it was out of date. But if you go back to number 4 at the beginning, under issues for consideration, it basically tells us we started doing this in February 2020, looking back at the previous financial year, and because of COVID, it got interrupted. Right, so that's why it all seems to be out of date, and I'm sure that our next one will be a lot more up to date and relevant.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I just wanted to, I guess, just test and check that audits are done as a process of continuous improvement, and particularly important in a large organisation that these random audits are done. That's the first thing. And I'm just reading the comment about the procurement manual and policy that has been implemented, I think, subsequently to this audit being done, or as part of the process, maybe running side by side with this audit. Is that something that's going to be reported on as part of that quarterly reporting, how the procurement manual and policy is being applied? Thank you.
So just to confirm, so that everyone can hear on the speaker, because the recommendation includes reference to the procurement policy and guidelines and training of staff, that will be reported on in the monitoring report.
Yeah, look, thank you, Rachel. I thought it was a good report, and easy to read, and obviously a couple of things we need to address. I think it was important, Nikki, that you said what you've just said, because especially for the public and people out there that may think we're sitting here like Muppets, not listening or reading to what they're seeing, but we've obviously had discussions about this earlier, and the fact that we are implementing all the recommendations, and we are keeping a close eye, and we are able to monitor it going forward every quarter. Hopefully will give the public a little bit of satisfaction. Thank you.
Have I been promoted, Chairman? I just wondered if, because the 2020 year was a pretty disruptive year, whether it would make sense for the audit, for the next audit, to be for the 2021 financial year.
I'm not entirely sure that's a question for me to answer. Are you referring to a procurement audit or any audit?
The internal audit program. It seems that if we want to bring it forward so that it's really relevant, that we would do the current year. Now, I know we haven't finished the year, but we're jolly well close. And it seems that it would be more relevant if we actually focused our internal audit on the year that we've just completed. Because the interim year is going to be a bit messy.
So for the absence of doubt, you think it would be prudent to do some audit work in the year ended 30 June 21, as in the year we're just about finishing, to look at specific areas.
So the year would be the the audit would cover the 2021 year rather than the 1920 year.
Procurement.
Well, I would have thought for the whole internal audit.
I think because that's kind of like the next one on the agenda, isn't it? Developing an audit plan.
Thank you. Actually, just jumping to the next item on the agenda, 7.3, I think we'll discuss it under 7.3. That's okay, Member Jackson. Councillor Sam, you had a question?
I've got 3 questions for Rachel and 1 for Nikki. Do you want to take them one by one, or just... yeah. Yeah, well, so actually just picking up on the question from Mr. Jackson, I guess the first question is, in terms of the lessons learned and the recommendations in this report, when would you suggest there needs to be essentially a repeat exercise of the procurement review? When's that best timed?
Procurement audits tend to be every 2 or 3 years, but they can be to a particular targeted area. So this was quite a broad brush audit. Some clients, including councils, will ask you to only look at over $1 million, that kind of thing. So the cycle seems to be around the 2 or 3 years for procurement type audits.
Thanks. The second question relates to just the methodology under item 6 in the report, which is around the iwi partnerships. And I just wanted to clarify that the review would only pick up those payments that are made in accordance with a relationship agreement, partnership agreement, or in the spirit of a partnership agreement. I think there's some things where you've sort of suggested that there were payments made, even though that wasn't specifically for that particular, there wasn't an agreement in place for that year or specific provision for payment in a particular year. But I guess my question is, did the review pick up other potential payments that might have been made, for example, for a cultural impact assessment or in connection with, I guess, a CapEx project? Or is this purely limited to partnership agreements?
Doing the initial data search, we try and search for all payments that have gone to X, whatever X is. So obviously there's always a possibility that a payment may not have been captured during that search, and we search within the financial systems, the purchasing order systems and things like that. So you can never say you've 100% got everything, but if other payments were there was the potential for them to be noted. It would also depend on who they were made out to and things like that, because you're doing data analytics, so you're searching across a range of fields.
The final question for you, Rachel, was around the references in the review document to supply of documents or unavailability of information. And I understand that this was obviously the process around this report was disrupted because of COVID. Can I just understand from your perspective, if documentation is not forthcoming, and so it's requested and it's not forthcoming, do you then explore the why, or do you seek an explanation as to why that information is not being provided, whether it doesn't exist, can't be found, was never created, or do you sort of go into that line of inquiry with the organisation?
I'm afraid it's going to be a politician's answer, yes and no. because it depends on what you can't find, why you can't find it, how old it is. There's a whole host of reasons. Quite often they can be systems related, data, the way data's been stored, even things like things disappearing under the 365 cloud and stuff like that. So, given that one has to be mindful of the expenditure of public funds in terms of an audit role as well, you have to make some judgment calls as to when do you say we can't find the documents as opposed to how long you keep looking. So I can't give it a straight answer on that in a general way. Sorry about that.
And then just the final question for Nikki, just in relation to the iwi partnerships. It seems from the review that the partnership agreements themselves might need a bit of a update, refresh. Is that, aside from the two that are specifically referenced in the review document, is there an intention to include that as part of a forward-looking work program in terms of looking at those partnership agreements and the scope, I guess?
My understanding, and if I've captured anything here, I'm sure David will jump in, is that is a focus that the Chief Executive is looking to take in noting, and this was noted in the in-committee discussion, that those are out of date, and it is something that David did commit to wanting to look at, and obviously scope, but also future inclusion. And I actually commented as well in this report with regards to the reporting expectations and a whole range of things that actually were picked up also by Councillor Takapua that need to be incorporated in that discussion. If I've missed anything, then I'm sure David will add.
Thank you. Can we just go back to Councillor Sam's question about documentation? We put you on the spot here. So you say I can totally understand that you might not be able to find some documents, but were there any documents that you thought were particularly relevant or really important that you couldn't find that were important to the audit? So it's that degree of importance as to that source document. Were you unable to find any critical documents that would lead to a different conclusion?
The obvious ones that I couldn't find are actually mentioned in the report, and that was those approvals. So they're the ones that, it's highly unlikely that if there was any document that was that critical, it would be in the report. I'd have to go back through an awful lot of work papers to give a detailed answer, but like I said, the two that were critical in the view of CKS audit, I think it was 2 or 3, were those ones around the approvals, and they were in there. So very unlikely.
Yeah, I'm sure if it was actually critical, you would have actually probably remembered it, or even identified it in your report. Any further questions? All right, in that case, we've actually now got 4 recommendations on the screen. Now, I'm looking for some guidance from Nikki here. Do we need to actually formally also, Nikki, add a recommendation about the monitoring, or are you happy to just do that anyway?
I am going to do it anyway, but I think for the purposes for council to have confidence, I think that may well be worthwhile to do that.
So I'm happy to move the recommendations on the screen, and if we add another recommendation, another suggested recommendation is that the CEO be asked to report quarterly on the progress of outstanding recommendations. So that's not every quarter. We will expect a full report on progress of outstanding recommendations. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Member Jackson. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Is against, carried. Thank you very much. Item 7.3, which is the next stage of the process on page 41. Do you want to just take us through the key issues and options here, Rachel, and probably Nikki as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The report, as you can see, the next thing is to look at developing an internal audit work program, and the document you've already read talks about a couple of the key things around internal audit, and also the areas of internal audit that are of a high level of attention, and the ones that tend to be cycled through, which was your procurement, payroll, cash handling, and sensitive expenditure. And I just wanted to also talk very briefly about internal audit, because internal audit is different to external audit, because we report internally and we actually work with the organisation, and people talk about best practice and continuing improvement and things like that, and that's part of the objective of internal audit. Whereas external audit report externally, they set what they're going to do and they report and do what they do. For internal, I actually highlighted two of the words in the document that came out. One of them is relevant and the other one is objective. If it's not relevant and it's not adding value, then personally I don't believe there's any point in doing an internal audit. And obviously the whole process around working out what is relevant and what does add value also looks at a whole bunch of things like risk. And this is the sort of thing that why internal audits are developed in conjunction with an organisation, because it's people within an organisation that are aware of the areas where there are potential risks or potential concerns or a new project they just want to get looked at. I mean, we had a presentation from health and safety earlier, and there's actually a classic example. If health and safety contractors are supposed to be doing da-da-da-da-da-da-da, then that can be a little mini internal audit to select a sample of those and check. Because the other key thing about an internal audit is the person has to be independent. So there's lots of those little types of things you can do. Examples of some things I've done in the past in an organisation, we actually audited the company car policy to see if it was discriminatory. It actually was, which was quite interesting. But so there's things you think of that are a concern that you want checked, as well as I'm going to call the big runty ones like procurement, payroll, etc., cash handling. That's the sort of thing where the senior leadership team and so on need to think. It's almost like having a brainstorm. It's actually quite good to have a workshop on it. You know, what are the things that are really of concern to us? Where do we see the future risks? And that can be the whole range of risks that you have in the risk register, including reputational, which is why sensitive expenditure and conflicts of interest tend to be quite common areas of audit, because, you know, I've been a counsellor, I know the papers can take a considerable interest. So that was probably the only other things I wanted to say about it, other than pop in another couple of areas where internal audit can be useful. Steering committees is one. So it's a proactive role. You're building a new system, you're doing a such and such. If you get some input from the internal auditor, then you get the controls built in instead of having to review later and finding out what's missing and putting them there later. Like I said, you can do checks on loads of things. One job I was asked to do but ended up not happening was actually checking around the issues of testing for water quality. So obviously you have to be qualified to know the techie side, but in terms of checking that the checks have taken place, it's a fairly standard operational audit. Trigger events is another thing. Changes of staff, a bad experience in another council might make you think you want to have a quick look at that one yourself. They don't have to be big projects. Procurement is usually big. Payroll is usually quite big. Checking a company car policy or a sharp, short health and safety, are people doing what they're supposed to be doing, could be quite small. There's another area that internal audit can be working sometimes, and that's around comparatives. So looking at comparing with other organisations. But the key thing for that is around getting quality data. And I actually did, because some years back I was involved in quite a bit of roading, and I say this, I'm not a roading engineer, so not the technical side, but on the support side. And also work done then around sealed pavement maintenance and trying to establish, a dollar per kilometre basis, what was reasonable, what was average, etc. And just out of interest, to give you an idea how hard it can be to develop base data to do comparatives, here were some of the things that came back that made this, well, when I say impossible to do, but not a very useful exercise. The way contractors price, who bears the risk? The client, or so the state council in this case, or the contractor? How are the overheads divvied up in the rate? And for all the other accountants in the room, we all know that overheads is an art and a science, especially in central government. I didn't say that. The current condition of the network. Again, this is getting out of my area of expertise, but I understand that the type of land, if it's built on peat, it goes, and it gets dry, it sinks down, all the rest of that. So there's a whole load of things that made a lot of comparatives difficult. Procurement methodology itself, which what we've just discussed in the last audit. If different procurement methodologies are used, the comparatives become difficult. Have you got an alliance? There's another difficult area. Have you got a lump sum maintenance contract? So again, comparatives is an area that internal audit can help with, comparing you with comparatives, provided you can get good baseline data. So I think looking at that page, that's probably my thoughts on it. But again, happy to take any questions on any of the internal auditing side before Mickey takes questions on the hard stuff.
Nikki, can I just ask you what, in terms of the process, what does management intend to do in terms of bringing back a final recommendation? What's the process that you see? And then I'll take questions.
So the reason this paper has been brought to the FAR committee was because it was discussed in the prior in-committee session on the 31st of March, where the councillors had requested to hear from Rachel with regards to the scope or areas of which the internal audit can cover. So today was for the presentation for Rachel to cover that. At that meeting, you will recall that I had discussed there has been a range of conversations that council have been having as part of the LTP, where there's other areas of focus in the work program which this may well be beneficial to consider alongside where your internal audit focuses. From a management point of view, the standard process is that management would go away. There is a set budget for internal audit, and within that scope, we would look at what we understand of the council priorities, and we would propose the areas where we believe that the focus could best add value. Obviously, though, as part of that, it's important for council first to have this discussion with the internal auditor to understand the scope of services that can be provided. So the next step of the process, depending on the discussion following this, would be for that to be brought back to the FAR committee. It's currently signalled when you look at the next item, which is the FAR work program, to come back in May to the May meeting. But that will be dependent on whether councillors have a set view at this point that may not have been covered in what Rachel has discussed today. That would be the process.
Thank you. Any questions?
I suppose the question then, following on from Brian's question earlier around timing, should we do 2019-2020, or do we wait till 2020-21 before we actually start a new process?
If I may, through the chair, make a suggestion. To a certain extent, it depends on what it is you want to look at. So if it's something that ties to the financial year, then it's convenient but not necessary to tie it to a financial year. But if it's something like looking at car park leases, I don't actually know if you've got any, but just that kind of thing, then it can be done at pretty much any time that fits in with council's other work programs.
Yeah, Rachel, I've got a few things on my list of things that I was envisaging an internal audit program might pick up on, and I was keen for you just to perhaps respond to whether you see value in these particular areas, and perhaps identify if you've done this type of thing in the past, and I guess a bit of the how, because that will sort of give me an indication of whether these are worthwhile as sort of putting into the mix. But the four areas I've got there are delegations and delegation risk, budget discipline, project budgeting, including around contingency planning, and then the final one is around zero-based budgeting. And only a small part of the organisation at the moment has adopted zero-based budgeting. But there may be some further discussion around this table around broader implementation of that approach. And so there might be some value in looking at how that zero-based budgeting that has been implemented, how effective that's been, or whether that's been done in the right way. Can you comment on those four areas and whether you, as I say, in terms of past, whether those areas have been, part of past audits that you've done, and potentially the value out of looking at those?
Can I just ask you to repeat the second one?
Budget discipline. So Do you understand what I mean by that?
Well, I'm assuming that you mean actuals versus budget and how well people stick to their budgets.
Correct.
Right, the delegations, again, depending on if you're talking about the full council delegation policy versus financial delegations, reviewing delegations is a standard part of lots of audits because it's one of the controls that people don't exceed their delegations. So whether or not the delegations that were assigned to people in certain, I'm going to say technical areas, were suitable is not something that our firm would be qualified to cover. But in terms of whether or not people are remaining within their delegations, then we could, because that's a very standard audit. Budget discipline is actual versus budget. It's a pretty, what your variances are is a fairly standard financially type review. It's really management accounting, the old accounting ways of looking at things. Project budgeting again around the people staying within their delegations, are they meeting budget timelines, critical path, all those kind of things. We can review that kind of thing, but whether or not, let's say it was building roads, things we did roads before, whether or not the amounts that were decided were reasonable for that type of expenditure, we couldn't because we don't have the technical engineering skills to do it. So you can see it comes down to what you're technically qualified to do. Zero-based budgeting, I've actually done zero-based budgeting in the private sector quite a long time ago. I've never audited it. I'm not quite sure how you would audit it because I suppose if you go through the process, then you could audit that the process had been followed, or you could possibly, if it was a new exercise for council, you could possibly touch base, if you have a project plan, before a project plan for zero-based budgeting, there could be certain key points whereby the auditor comes in just to have a bit of a look and see if it's, if what's happening is expecting, if people are doing the types of calculations and making the assumptions that you believe they should perform those views. So that would be my best guess on zero-based budgeting.
Chairman, it may be, some people may remember that I have mentioned a couple of times zero-based budgeting. The Chief Executive and I both came up through the Toyota school, and what I would see is perhaps the auditing of the process of zero-based budgeting.
Can I just cut that zero-based budgeting discussion off at the knees without actually cutting it off the knees, because it's actually on the next item of the agenda, and I think that's probably the more of the discussion, rather than, because we haven't done it yet, so let's decide if we're doing it and then we'll revisit it if that's okay.
Can I just comment on that? I guess why I raised it under this item was because voluntarily one part of the organisation has done this, done zero-based budgeting approach, and so I just wanted to, I guess, explore what that might look like in terms of an internal audit program to, I guess, learn from that, so that it could potentially inform wider implementation. So that was just the context.
Any further questions, comments on this item 7.3? Therefore, can I have a mover for the recommendation? Oh, thank you, Councillor Christine. Seconded, thank you, Councillor David. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. Now, my apologies, Councillor Jennings. In the previous item, I noted that you abstained from voting because of your conflict of interest, and it should be noted. My apologies. Next item is the Finance Audit and Risk Committee work program, and the Mayor has already pointed out to me maybe it's actually incorrect. It should actually be the reporting program. Don't run away, Nikki, because we might need your assistance here. I know this is the CFO's report, but I think you might, with the work you've just done in terms of internal audit, might be invaluable. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, for your contribution, and safe travels.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I guess what I'll highlight first is that this report includes this, as he mentioned, the standard reporting that happens throughout the year. But in addition, as you'll see on the timetable on page 45, It also includes some additional items that are planned to come through the work program, and one of those that's been discussed at length is the affordability assessment. So that work has started, and that's the date in October. The October meeting is when that's planned to come back to the committee to have the first view of the information. As well, you'll see on there's a presentation from Bancorp, who will give an overview of the Treasury activity for the council. There's planned to be a discussion from Aon in terms of our insurance profile. As well, the audit management letter is planned to come to the next letter from the last annual report. So there's, in addition to the regular reporting timetable, there's some of those more significant items that are mentioned in there as well. One point to note is some of the timing of the Bancorp standard reporting will change on this report to align with the normal quarterly reporting. But in addition to that, I guess at the bottom of the page you'll see 3 bullet points around risk reporting, full review of the revenue financing policy, including a rating review, zero-based budgeting, as we've just talked about. And I think there are a number of items which, through conversations in the long-term plan and through general conversations, a number of you are keen to have some input into some more business improvement or community discussion or policy change conversations to lead into future long-term plans and into future years that you'd like to be part of forming that discussion around. And those pieces of work will come back through this committee. But in terms of how best to have the conversation about what should form that work program to then come back to this committee to formalize and to put onto a schedule in terms of a work program, we talked about potentially needing a little bit more of a session with you guys first to have a bit of a brainstorming conversation and make sure that everyone has their chance to put all those ideas up, and then have a conversation about what resourcing we might need as well, and then we can bring that back to this committee in this same sort of a format to then discuss and confirm in some more detail. So the thinking at this stage was that as we work through the remaining LTP conversations and leading into the hearings, that we could find some time around the 19th of May to have that session where we talk about some of the ideas in more detail. And then we would look to hopefully come back to the June meeting with a bit of a proposal to then discuss with members of the public and in further detail and debate. Happy to take any questions or.
Sorry, this might be a dumb question. How do I? Could you just briefly outline or define what the affordability assessment will capture?
Sure. So what it's planned to capture at this stage in terms of what the team have started, and based on some experience of work I've done before, is the district from a mapping perspective is broken up into a number of what everyone typically understands in the past as mesh blocks, but I think they call them SA1 and SA2 areas now. So that's a section of housings from a mapping perspective that you can break them down into from a Stats New Zealand perspective. And that way you can, the information that you can get from that, from a census information, is median household income for that defined group of properties. And then you can also get deprivation index information for that group of properties as well. And what we can then do with that is look at what's the median rates for that area, median rates as a share of household income. And then that gives you the ability to look at the rates impact on those various groupings of households. And then in my experience at Kapiti, in terms of some of the rating review or potential rating review, it allows you to have a conversation about the way that we allocate rates and what would be the impact if we change some of the ways of allocation. So in terms of a evidence base, I think the deprivation index at that smallest level we can get, and the stats information at the smallest level we can get, in my experience, has been the best information we've got to try and understand the impacts of rates on households. But absolutely happy to take any other advice I think we've had some conversations with members of the public. Graham Lindsay, I think last week had some ideas in terms of different evidence that's come from different areas as well. But it's a long answer, but
no, that was really good. Yeah, I think so. And why I ask is in that Three Waters report, I think page 25, it even breaks it down to a minimum wage earner, how many hours they would have to work in order to pay, say, the wastewater and the water rate annually. It was, yeah, really interesting. So, yeah, that would help. That put a lens on a bigger.
But as well, another layer that we can add to that is knowing from the people that apply for rates rebates and receive rates rebates, then we do confidentially have the information on their income as well at a per household level. So for those particular households, and they tend to be the ones that do struggle the most, and that's why they apply for the rates rebate, we can understand impacts of different rating policy changes for those particular households as well, which can be quite useful.
Thank you, Chair. As you alluded to, I'm not comfortable with calling this a work program. As you said, it is more a reporting program, and I think it does need some refinement, because I do believe that to receive a health and safety report each month is a bit over the top. I also think that we should be, even the financial reports, quarterly, yes, but then variance reports for the other months. I'm conscious of the fact that, already the amount of reporting that is coming back to council doesn't need to be excessive. We should make sure it's realistic and practical. And I'm glad that following our conversation earlier regarding those additional topics, I think it is important to construct a work program with those that are time defined. I'm conscious that if they're not time defined, then they will lose impetus and won't be top of mind when they come about. So making sure that they do get added into some sort of work program.
And the chief executive's probably going to throw something across the room at me for raising delegations. That's one thing I did note is missing from the work program at the moment. I think I understood that we have an annual review, I think, of the schedule, and so it's usually due April, May. Obviously, with other things that are happening, it might need to push that back, but just wanted to make sure that was going to be included somewhere.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. It's on my list too, but it wasn't for the work program. Just why I've asked Nikki just to stay at the front desk is, where do you think your reporting on the internal audit work, the update program that you just flashed in front of us, or shown us, when do you think that's likely to happen in terms of, just indicatively, would be useful?
I'm very conscious about timing of getting this set. So in terms of what's proposed here, as mentioned before, I was hoping to have something come back to FAR in May, because I think from Rachel's point of view in terms of booking her in, she is quickly being booked up on other work. So it's important that we do set what our program's going to be and then book in the appropriate timing for that. So process for that would look like in May a report would come back, which would be a recommendation from the Chief Executive essentially for the internal audit work program, where the areas as a Chief Executive and management team believe add the most value, and the budget in which that works within, because unfortunately we don't have a budget big enough to do everything, so there will have to be a prioritisation around that. And that would then enable this table to have a discussion as to whether that meets the expectations or not. Alternatively, given that our CFO has also discussed the idea of having a session with the elected representatives with regards to the broader work program, if the members felt it was appropriate to have further discussion on the internal program there as well, then obviously we could push that back a further month.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this? So we are just, I think what I agree with the Mayor, it is actually a reporting program. It actually does generate significant work for the staff. So probably the work program is probably, a work program it is, but yes, it is actually about when that work is actually then reported. Do I have any further discussion? Councillor David?
Yeah, look, just on page 45, those 3 bullet points there. I'm just keen to understand the process. There are significant, I suspect, workload issues potentially. I'm thinking particularly of the zero-based budgeting idea, and no disrespect to the principles around that. But I just need to know that there will be a forum where we can decide collectively whether or not we see that as a priority, for example, and if so, the limitations around that. So I just want to flag that.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Just a quickly note, I think the session that we talked about on the 19th would be that one where we look to put everything up and give you an indication from a resourcing perspective of how much would be needed.
I assume from a resourcing perspective it's true, it's how much council time would be required as well.
May I, through you, Chair? So on that basis of the session on the 19th of May, given the need to understand, I guess, the resourcing of each of those components, the 3 bullet points listed below, what I'd be seeking as feedback from the table then is, do you wish to hold off the recommendation around the internal work program until you've had that discussion? Because it may well be that there is a discussion around whether timing is appropriate in what year and what we focus on, or are you comfortable for us to make a recommendation in May as planned, knowing that you're going to have that subsequent discussion?
Look, I'm very mindful of the Mayor's comments earlier about, quarterly versus monthly and so on, and I think with that in mind, and I'd seek guidance maybe from Mayor Burney, that it may be worthwhile to just hold off the recommendation until we consider, because I have a lot of sympathy for the Mayor's approach in terms of the quarterly reporting around a number of these things. So with that in mind, I wonder if the recommendations will be better postponed.
I mean, I agree. In fact, I'm almost prepared to almost make some suggestions in terms of financial quarterly reporting, right? But that's almost a given. And the same also with health and safety. We don't need a detailed health and safety report. And the other reports, some of the reports, it's actually, to me, it's actually getting that cycle right. That, to me, it's actually making sure that we, as governors, are getting the right information to monitor, but it's also that allows staff to actually get on and deliver the work, because otherwise they spend 80% of their time writing reports and 20% on delivery. So we need to get that balance right. So that's my view. And so I agree that we actually probably need that wider discussion probably on the 19th, and therefore defer. However, I did pick up on Nikki's comment that I think we need to potentially lock in Rachel for some work. Otherwise, if we don't lock her in, we could lose her. Is that what you said?
Timing could potentially see that move out. So she's setting her next 12 months ahead. So if we know that there is going to be areas of focus and we can indicate that we are seeking that from her and in which quarter, she can then lock that in. The risk would only be that potentially we move to a later slot to the others in whom she audits for. In my mind, I think the discussion on the 19th is really important, because I think that drives where the focus and value for council can be achieved. You can then align, is that best achieved through internal resource as part of work within your finance team? Is that best achieved through confidence through an internal audit? And you can actually use your levers to apply that to those areas. That's as an officer opinion. and we can then set in with Rachel where that value can be added as an internal audit.
Thank you. Any further discussion? So we'll still just have the recommendations. We're just going to receive the work program report at this stage. All right. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Davids. Seconded, Councillor Todd. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Next item, community facilities update. This is what I told you, otherwise you'd be up and down like a yo-yo, Nikki. We'll take the report as read. Any highlights, any additional information?
Chairman, I would just like to compliment them on the report. I thought it was excellent and a project well done.
Thank you.
Look, thank you, Chair. If I can just take this opportunity, I have taken the report as read, but there is something that I do need to point out. There is an error in a date. So on page 49, under the schedule section, I'd just like to identify that we put March 2020. That should be March 2021. In addition to that, I just want to give a little bit of background. The elected members of this committee will be aware that this project in scale, in terms of the financial investment, is a lot lower than probably the scale of some of the other projects which you previously would receive post-implementation reviews on. I acknowledge that, however, I want to explain why this was important for us to carry out this exercise. This is a community facility project, so the hydroslide obviously is attached to Alavan Aquatic Centre. This project's unique for us because we actually project manage this within our team. So the gentleman sitting next to me here, Brent Harvey, essentially project managed this as the lead within our team. So we didn't bring as part of the budget an additional resource in for a project manager, which would be common in other projects, particularly those of scale. We had a lead contractor and we had various local contractors who were part of this. For us, this was something that we wanted to understand, I guess, given the nature of the work, that it's attached to a current facility, actually have the ability to debrief and learn from it, because there will be, and unfortunately this hydroslide was unavailable to the community for a very long time, and I fully understand that that has caused a lot of concern for the community. But there will be occasions where in community facilities we have situations where we are responding to capital investment. I would hate to think we're doing that anytime soon on the hydroslide again, but I think we wanted to show you that with those contractors we have actually carried out a thorough post-implementation review, and we have learnt a number of things, and we will take those on board in going forward in community facilities projects, although they don't feature as much in scale to some of the other projects within the council portfolio. Other than that, I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, look, I'm just pretty much going to say exactly what Mr. Jackson said. That I think the report is easy to read and great detail, Nikki, and just for you and Brent and Paddy and all the team down there, it was an awesome job. It's working really, really well. You see a lot of happy kids, and I think it's, believe it or not, it's a lot of money, but it's money well spent for this community. But the way you guys have handled the whole situation, I think it's been first class.
Any other questions, comments? Hira?
Yeah, I just want to say that I appreciated the ongoing email updates around this project, because we do get asked in the street, at the pools or wherever, about certain things that the community can see, and the hydroslide, they can see it. Those sorts of visible things to them, rate quite highly. So if you don't know the answers when they ask you what's happening, so those were very helpful. Thank you.
Any further discussion? So I have a mover in Councillor Todd, a seconder in Hira for the recommendation. Is that fair? All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Infrastructure development update, item 7.6, page 53. Mr. Maguire, welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Can I just start by following up on Nikki's statement about scale? I've, over my career, worked in projects for some 2 or 3 decades now. And the ones I most remember are not the ones with the highest project value, but the highest impact. And that's impact on people through the way in which it's received, handled, dealt with, and the way it's been communicated. So I just want to just congratulate the team for delivering what is a high impact project, irrespective of any financial scale. You can tell we enjoy projects in our world. So, Chairman, I've had a lot of sugar today, Brian. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the report I'll take as read. I just have one little update on page 64, section 3.4.3. Shortly after we went to print, we received notification from Horizons seeking an extension of time for that hearing. I don't have the minute from the Commissioner to confirm the new date, but it will be, in his words, between 2 and 4 weeks beyond that 26th of May. The reason for that is we have exchanged RFI information and some technical information between the various parties and experts, and that coupled with a scheduling issue with the independent expert reviews, we've needed to extend the time frame for that hearing. Beyond that, we're getting towards the business end of the Foxton River Loop, and a couple of photos there to just explain. We've now got some barbecues, working barbecues, and some shelters in place, and you'll slowly start to see some action on the roads over the next couple of weeks, getting that final construction underway. From a financial perspective on the River Loop, we are getting towards the end now of the burn rate on the Crown funding, and we're starting to expend a council contribution. And we discussed that last month, and we're getting close to the end. There is a lag in that graph because of the long lead procurement items that will be carried forward and delivered when they arrive to site, hopefully in July, perhaps August. In good news, it's always good to bring good news to the table. Grass is growing in all that little patchy areas. I'm predicting the question, Councillor Brannigan. Grass is officially growing, and we put a lot of effort in, and congratulations to the site team for coming up with a plan and giving that a bit of tender love and care. So it'll be quite exciting to see a full solar grass through there. In terms of the Crown infrastructure update, we made great progress with that spiral line pipe. That's now complete. We've got 45 metres of trenching and 1 manhole to go, and then that whole of Queen Street New Side will be finished, and we can make our claim to the Crown for our first payment instalment. So good times there. Moving on, the Whale Lotu connections, that's been another triumph for the team, and I just thought it was a bit of a walk down memory lane for you. There's some before and after photographs there of the Free Church of Tonga. So the team on site did a terrific job really modernising that facility. We did have one little blip where we had to incur a little bit of our contingency to just do a little bit of extra drainage around the floor level, but that, there was allocation for some of those unforeseen elements, and that explains the little crossover in towards the end of March in that financial graph. We are carrying enough contingency to take us to the end of this project. North East Levin is carrying on, is doing a great job. They're on target to be done and out of the road towards the middle of this year, June-ish. Starting to trim the road now. The last of the pipes and manholes are being installed, so we'll start to get our road back towards the middle of the year. Beyond that, happy to take any further questions.
Oh, sorry. Not a question, but just a comment. I just want to pass on that contact I had for Foxton Beach School in terms of the involvement in the planting day, and the comments around your team. I see Craig there and the Rick Services team, and hats off to Councillor Simmons who attended as well. Unfortunately, I couldn't get there, but just the comments came back was fantastic, and just the way the team held, did the day and had the tree planting, and everyone felt really involved. So I just wanted to say, it's really, really good part of that project has been that public involvement, and if you drive past here, it's coming together really nicely. So just well done to all Brent, and thanks for getting that.
Yes. I just wanted to acknowledge, I thought Ross might have picked up on it. It was Coley Street, Foxton Beach, and Putatafa students that attended that day. Thought you might have picked up on it when you saw their uniforms. I was waiting for you to say something. But yeah, it was fantastic. Great turnout, thanks.
Hey, just a couple of questions. One's just from my curiosity, and the other one's, first of all, the barbecue areas you put in there, they're obviously gas barbecues. Are they bottled or are they run directly to it? Okay, and the second question is to do with Roslyn Road, the consent for Roslyn Road. Now, I might have got confused last time when Councillor Mitchell asked you this, but I just want to confirm it for you. So I realise there's been a delay from the 26th of May for 2 to 4 weeks. That's fine. What I want to know is, what if it doesn't get consented? What is our plan B for that area?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, this question comes up every FAR committee, and I have answered it several times. So I'm not sure how we want to record the official answer, because the project that we're currently doing is a series of renewals for the road, and 3 waters, and that is to connect into the existing outfall into that attenuation area. There is currently stormwater discharging across that corner at Fairfield and Roslyn Road. So we are connecting into there until or unless we get a consent to improve that attenuation area. So the answer is we are renewing the stormwater pipe with a slightly bigger pipe, and it will connect to the current outfall.
So I'm not trying to be a smarty pants here. I'm not at all, Brent. I know that's why I wasn't. You answered it last time. I just want to, in my little stupid head, I just want to get this right. So if we don't get the consent, the water's still going to go where it goes today. Is that right? Thank you.
Any further questions of Mr. Maguire? All right, can I have a mover for the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Ross. Seconded, Councillor Wayne. All those in favour, please say aye. Is against, carried. All those, right. Next item, 7.7, infrastructure operations update. One or two projects here to report on.
Evening, Mr. Chair. Happy to take the report as read largely, but I'll just update a couple of things. Excellent to have Pogues Road Bridge open. It's been a while since Council has done a bridge. In fact, the last one was the Koparawa Stream Bridge on Tavistock Road, which was done 13 years ago. So it's significant for us to do a bridge. I don't think it'll be 13 years before the next one. We've got a few others that are definitely due, but it is quite good to finally see a bridge done. The other reports there are project completion. They're not a review. They're just saying that the project is complete at this stage. So we will do further studies now, traffic counts, and look at if the effect of what we've done has worked before we do a proper review of those projects. just to make sure that we're on the right track with what we're doing, and to just check that effectiveness. The Water New Zealand National Performance Review. I'd just like to make a comment. There was an assertion made earlier that we hadn't provided all of the information from one of our speakers, and that wasn't very good. The fact is that this is a voluntary thing that we opted to go into so that we could measure ourselves against our peers. And as Councillor Tukupu said, we're very middle of the road, so it's very good for us to be able to gauge that and have a look. But I would like to, if I could, just on page 3 of that report, under item 1.1, the statement, Horowhenua supplied all data requested. So I'm not sure where that assertion came from, but just wanted to clarify that all the information we were asked to provide, we did. Apart from that, there's nothing else to add.
I'm not sure if you meant me. Oh, public speaker. Okay. Yeah, because I was like, I mentioned the documentation in the audit review, not this report. But just a couple of questions, and I'm sure because I'm sure this is out of date. Like page 45, they we're rated high on the leakage and room for improvements, but is that right? That's 2010 information, and we've done quite a bit of work since. Can you confirm? Page 45. Oh, I think their data is like old, maybe, on the leakage.
I just have to check on where that data's come from. So we provide the data that they request. They put it into the graph, so I'll just have to go back and double check. But it should be the data, the recent data.
Next question is for pages 53, 54, and 55. But now that you've said we do this voluntary, I'm trying to check how we stand up against our peers. The condition grading of our networks is we've got that somewhere. It's just we didn't provide it. I'm not trying to understand that.
There's a drop-down box in our asset management system where you can put a grading into it that we haven't used today, but we can assess the condition of our assets by looking at the material type, the age, the location, CCTV, so we can definitely ascertain condition. It's just that we haven't been using the box, the drop-down box where the information was gained from.
Any other questions, comments? Councillor Joe?
Chair, page 76, 3.3, and forgive me if you've covered this. When will we get the Horowhenua Alliance report that we didn't get this month?
It has come through. We'll combine it, have a combined one for next time. Going forward, the new Alliance Director, he started on Monday. The Alliance Director will eventually be doing his own reports and reporting on it too far. He did only start last week, and we do want him to come back next week, so haven't chucked him in here at this point.
I take exception to that. So I think most members do as well. All right, Councillor Brent.
Given Andrew Street safety improvements, great to see we're 10% under budget. That's good effort. That includes NZTA subsidy? Because it's been asked.
Yeah, that's good. All of those budgets for the roading are NZTA subsidised, so that's the full amount includes their portion and our portion in those budgets. 62%. Yeah.
Any other questions? Therefore, can I have a mover for the recommendation on page 67, please? Thank you, Mayor Burney. Seconded, Councillor Ross. Oh, all right. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Next item, customer and strategy activity update. Page 77, 7.8. Thank you, ladies. Take your, you got any additional information? The report is taken as read.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee and councillors. Just to add to the report, you might note that there is a change to the layout of the information in the report, and it's in direct response to some recent feedback that we've received. So I hope that the committee sees favourable on that. My parts of the report, parking and earthquake-prone buildings, are definitely taken as read, but happy to answer any questions. But for now, just hand it over to Megan to talk about consenting activities.
Good evening, everyone. I've just got a few things to add to my report. As you'll see in the report, the building team are experiencing increased levels of activity across the board for the whole range of activities that they do, and planning activity remains steady. Just want to point out on page 81, there's a minor mistake where I have said that the number of land use consents approved year to date is slightly lower than previous financial years. It's actually slightly higher, being just 2 consents above the same time last year. In the highlights section, I've identified that our IANZ accreditation reassessment took place last week. Now, while we haven't received the final report yet, I can share the interim findings with you. So overall, the outcome was largely positive, although the process seemed a lot more difficult and detail focused than it did 2 years ago. We have 3 general non-compliances to resolve, and these mostly relate to matters that represent a very small proportion of our workload. So the assessors have indicated that we are still considered to be low risk, and that will mean that if we clear our general non-compliances on time, our next assessment should be in 2 years. In the closing meeting, the assessors noted that our resourcing is quite finely balanced at present in relation to the workloads coming in. And they indicated that this is something we will need to stay on top of to maintain suitable levels of statutory compliance. To provide some context in relation to resourcing, under the building accreditation regulations, if we lose more than 25% of our building technical staff within a quarter of a calendar year, and they're not replaced with staff with equal qualifications and competencies, we have to notify IANZ and MB of this change. Now they then assess that, and they assess whether that then changes our risk level. And so potentially changes to staffing could trigger additional assessments, which has implications for costs, and it also has implications for our ongoing accreditation. So in relation to our team, it's relatively small. 25% would be more than 1 staff member leaving in a quarter. At this stage, we are aware that a staff member intends to retire at the end of July, and so we are hoping that we will commence the recruitment process shortly. So I have nothing further to add to that, but happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Yeah, just a question under 3.7, which is about the earthquake-prone buildings. I was just particularly interested ahead of a briefing and workshop that we're having tonight around the town centre, was around the feedback that you are getting. I note that the final comment there around that some landowners have already indicated it's not going to be viable for them to strengthen. Can you give us some numbers or scale around that, and also just talk me through the level of engagement we're actually having with these landowners? Are they reaching out to us, or are we reaching out to them?
Thanks, Councillor Jennings. So, to put it in perspective, there were 17 buildings that have been deemed earthquake prone. Of those 17 buildings, 2 building owners have approached us and talked to us about their intentions, I guess, around seismic strengthening for their buildings.
the communication that has come out from us, from me to date, has been around our regulatory responsibilities. So it has been about informing of decisions that have been made. But if we look back to when this process started back in 2017, there's been a lot of communication with building owners so moving through the entire of the areas that were potentially priority areas through to making a decision around to priority areas to potentially earthquake prone buildings. So the owners of these buildings have had plenty of communication with us in that time. We are also getting a few building owners who are coming to us directly to talk about their options.
On that subject, out of the 17 buildings, what percentage is that? Like how many did you check? Did you check 27? Did you check 17? And the supplement question to that is, once you've notified them, because we've just done this process, how long do they have to do the work that's required or sell or whatever they choose to do?
So just to clarify, these buildings are in the priority area only, and so we've done the assessments, we've done the profiling of 107 buildings in the priority area, and of that it's whittled down to 17 that we've recently issued earthquake prone building notices to. I just want to also just add to that this is only the priority area. We do have an obligation to go out and do the rest of the district as well. So all non-residential buildings will need to be profiled and to go through that. So we have started that activity. We have a time frame within the Building Act to do that and identify all potentially earthquake prone buildings by July 2022. So we're in that process at the moment. To answer your second question there, Councillor, the time frame for priority buildings that have been identified as potentially earthquake prone and a priority, they will have 7.5 years from when they were issued the earthquake prone building notice to do it. So many of them have until around September 2028.
Can I just clarify, you're saying non-residential, so that includes rural minor dwellings, minor buildings as well?
So not necessarily. We have to identify all of the buildings first. So we've gone through and identified all non-residential buildings, and then there is a methodology that is provided by MB that we go through to determine whether or not it is earthquake prone or not. So each one of those buildings, absolutely, we've gone and noted down, but we've still got to go through a process around identifying potentially earthquake prone buildings from there.
So through you, Chair, if I could just raise three matters. First is actually just responding to a matter that was raised by Mrs. Bolt earlier on around reporting of the consents, the update, and I can't remember the page that it's on now. I think on page 78 of the report. That's actually updated on a regular basis. So it's untrue that we haven't provided this information. I think she mentioned earlier last year. Yeah. So that's actually incorrect. We provide updated information. So just for the record. The second thing is, look, if I could through you, Mr. Chair, just acknowledge the effort that Megan and her team have gone through over the last 3 or 4 months to get to a point where we are going to get a very, very good report back from IANZ in terms of our reaccreditation. To actually have that indication that we won't be reassessed for 2 years is significant. We are deemed as low risk, and this is what this committee is all about. And I know Megan has worked tirelessly over the last 3 months to actually get to the point where all of the information has been prepared and submitted to the team that was here, and the pretty onerous approach that they take to actually get to a point where they provide that recognition. So I just wondered if it's okay through you, Chair, just to acknowledge the effort that Megan has put in. The third point I just want to raise, and this again is about the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee. Megan has highlighted a significant risk for us around our resourcing in this particular area. And I've actually raised it with a couple of members, but it'll require further discussion as we move forward to ensure that we actually are able to continue to deliver the program of work that's required around building consents, and that will be brought to the table in the not too distant future.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chief Executive. I am aware of a number of councils who have gone through this process and have struggled to get a pass mark through this accreditation process this time round. And I believe that the standard that was previously being applied is no longer acceptable. There has actually been a substantive change in the standard that is actually being required before you get a pass mark. Is that fair, Megan? And I know of one council, based on the last one, they thought they would pass with flying colours, and they literally just scraped through, which then puts them at risk, and they've got to do it all over again in 12 months. Ouch. So, well done. I understand. Count.
Thank you. Just referring to the table of data about the new dwelling units consented and seeing that there were just over 200 the last couple of years and that the trend is going up, and the comment that was given, or assertion that was given a while ago by Mr. Lindsay that that was a loss of 21 million in development contributions. I'm struggling with working out the maths. Could we actually have that information brought back to the next meeting so we can put that to bed once and for all, please?
Chairman, I'm happy to be given number 3. I just wonder if the Chief Executive's comments to the team are recorded in our minutes. I'm happy to move your words, Chairman.
Now we know what we want you to say, don't we, Doug? And on that.
Yeah, the interest rates can't go any lower. The unfortunate truth is they are going up. As you'll see on the report, page 93, that yield curve is getting really steep. You notice the previous yield curves are really flat. So what's happening in the US, with their economy starting to pick up, interest rates are starting to go up, especially in the long term. Now, central banks are going to keep the short-term interest rates low because they're all still doing the stuff, for COVID, the quantitative easing and the low interest rate, So the short term is not where the risk is, it's the long term part of the curve where the risk is. So, and they're all picking that because of all the supply chain problems we're having and all the increased costs that the retailers over the supply chain costs. There's going to be a little blip in inflation, but when the supply chain problems ease, then the inflation will drop off again. So they're prepared to accept that little blip in the inflation without reacting too violently to it. they can see it coming. They're not going to react too terribly much to it as long as it remains a blip rather than a long term. So we'll come back with the management report to council on the LTP. We have had a look at the interest rate assumptions in the LTP, but we'll discuss that when we come to talk about that. So is any questions?
Doug, or Jacinda, with our borrowings here, I noticed that there's obviously a reason for it. A couple of them there were still paying 4.2 and 5.1%, and they don't come out for a couple of years. Is there any way of we can't, obviously, otherwise we would have done it, wouldn't we? I thought so. Thank you.
Well, one of them, the first one falls due next month. So that's what I was saying in my report, that my cover report, that there's one of those due next month, and when we refinance that, that'll drop down. So the other big one is not due till April 23, so we wait there.
Any further comments? I would like, with the committee's agreement, I'm nervous about that upward yield curve and what it actually means in the long term. And I'm not proposing we take any action at the moment in terms of protecting the long-term interest rate, but I would actually appreciate in the next report or the next month if we could actually have some scenarios and potential options for mitigating potential continued upward swings of the interest rates. The information coming out and this is in the report, that America is getting better, that the COVID numbers are coming down, and that will actually then exacerbate the long-term interest rates. Now, if we could actually have some more options and analysis on that, I think that's timely, that we actually look at that from protecting the long-term interest rate risk for council.
I think, I think it's particularly relevant to our increased borrowings that we're looking at.
Yeah, agree, and I think Mr. Law intimated just before that when we get into our LTP discussions for our long-term plan, that I think it's then also prudent for us to ask the finance team to show some scenarios that do have a different overall rate of interest costs. There's some scenarios that will capture it out to the 10 years.
Any further? I don't think we need a resolution on that, Mr. Chief Executive. I'm sure your staff can do that for the next meeting without adding to their workload. I'm sure they can delegate it to an appropriate Treasury advisor. Not looking at you, Doug, I'm looking at Bancorp. Don't panic. So any further discussion, questions? Can I move it? I'll move the recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Wayne. All those in favour, please say aye. Is against carried. And I will adjourn the meeting for dinner because I understand dinner is ready. I believe we have a quorum. Yep. I reconvene the meeting. And our next item on the agenda is on page 101, item 7.10, our 9-month report to 31st of March. Thank you, CFO.
Thank you. I will take the report as read, but unfortunately I just need to highlight one slight error that I made on page 105. In terms of the surplus of 4.55 million, that was correct, but it was 1.3 million and 39% more than the year-to-date budget. So I just thought it was important that I note that and apologise for that.
Apologies accepted. Any questions, comments on the financial report?
I'll get organised, sorry. There was this question on note 5A on page 112. If I'm reading this correctly, we've got under the professional services line, is that a predicted variance of 2.8 by the end of the year? Is that what that's saying? 2.8 million?
Yep, it is. But the reason that's so high is because we are receiving, so it's the fellow to the church, the amount that we're spending, I believe it's 2.6 off the top of my head, but it is funded, so you'll see that in the expenditure line it'll be more, but there's also extra revenue. And if you go to page 104, that does summarize that extra spending and extra revenue for you. So, do you see that there? So sorry, I'll just clarify that. So yeah, you've got.
No, sorry, yeah, that clearly makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the report to 31st of March, including the non-financials? Right. Okay, therefore, can I have, if there's no further questions, can I have a move for the recommendation on page 101? Thank you, Councillor Todd. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor David. All those in favour, no further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Next item is items 7.11. Sounds good, doesn't it? Chief Executive's report, public participation. Thank you, Nikki, standing in for David.
Thank you, Chair and elect members. Hello again. Look, I just want to speak to this report largely because it is actually written by myself. This is something that is new. It's not a standard report of this committee, but what I heard at the prior committee meeting was a number of public participation speakers, and there were a number of things that were actually minuted as actions from those public participation requests. There also was some follow-up that was undertaken, which actually left essentially a public participation unable to be followed up with actual action. So what I thought might be useful to close the loops where these things are coming up in discussion is actually making sure we are bringing back to close out actions that are taken, and for you to then have a response as to what officers have undertaken from that. And almost like you would receive a monitoring report, is very specific to public participation. It also enables that loop to be closed with members of the public who may come to one meeting and not to the next. So this is a new report. I will take it as read, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions of Nikki? Points of clarification? Can I just ask a procedural thing? Is it appropriate that we actually have it at the end of the agenda, or do you think we should actually have it probably at the beginning? I just think from a public, so members of the public, right? Just for the future. I think okay, next question. No, got lots of speakers. People think it's a good idea doing this on an ongoing basis? All right?
Yeah, just a question. My understanding of public participation is that people read an agenda and they come along and they talk to us to give us their point of view about something, mainly when we've got a decision that we've got to make. And what I see happening is that some people use it as an avenue to ask a whole heap of questions, which personally I don't think it's for. And I'm just wondering if we could be encouraging people to actually send questions into council prior to meetings, and then once they've got that information, then they can come and talk to us about what they think with those facts in place. Quite often I feel that people haven't quite got the full story or the right facts before they talk to us. So what do other people think about? Is it a place for a whole lot of questions, or is it a place to try to convince us of their side of the story or their argument?
I agree with what you're saying, Councillor Mitchell. I think the only other pointer is to remember that obviously if they do have questions, then their avenue is to either, as you say, put those questions to officers in advance of a meeting, but generally that would be considered a legoima, and so because any time they would ask a request for information, it would be treated as a legoima and probably processed in that way, and so the timing in terms of dealing with that request might not necessarily correspond with the meeting time, because remembering that members of the public are getting the agenda at the same time essentially as we are, which is 6 or 7 days before the meeting, and so the window of opportunity to actually engage, put that request, get a response back to both elected members and members of the public is probably quite tight. So I think I think that often what they're doing is asking questions during the public participation as if to say, elected members, you need to be asking these questions. I mean, sometimes there is a genuine question, they need information so that they understand whatever the item is on the agenda. But sometimes the way in which it's framed is actually, their question is, yeah, elected member, please ask this question. So I think we've got to, there's sort of two different parts to it, I think, that we need to be cognizant of.
Yeah, I was just going to say that before I came on council, I asked questions of council officers. I never went through a legoima process. I would have thought that would be your last, the last method that you'd actually go to, that you'd belong to a ratepayer organisation, and like I bring questions from my ratepayer organisations back and ask council officers. There are other systems getting answers without having to go through the legoima process. So, yeah, that would be my comment on that.
So just to respond to that, it largely would come down to the nature of the questions, to be honest. I think when we consider council meetings, and this is in the context of either a council or a committee meeting, in most cases you'll note where answers can be provided, they will often be answered from the back table. I think if the intent of it was to give clarity to what was being sought, and we were able to turn that information around, and I say that, again, it comes down to the nature of the question, we would make every effort to be able to answer that on the evening, because I think it's really important both for the person who's participating and for the elected members, depending on the question, to provide that. However, there would be some questions that if they were quite broad and they dived into a certain level of detail, we would have to consider that as officers, and there may be occasions where that would potentially be treated as a legoima. But I can think of various examples where they are questions to council meetings, and we would respond to those on that evening to the person who's come to speak. But we'd need to understand what the questions are in advance and make every effort to do that.
and further to that is how do we shortlist in the meeting the myriad of questions that we receive? How do we decipher those and put them onto the list? And is that a conversation we have post a meeting where we can go through and get some comfort around what we want to have answered, because we don't. Sometimes you don't want to have to answer every little question that leads up down rabbit holes. I really like the idea because it should put to bed a lot of these repeat and a classic example just last week at the NLG where we had that same question that I've heard for the last 9 years, about the Kiwi waste, where does $500,000 go, and it'd be lovely just to be able to point to something. That's the answer to that question that you've continually asked.
Oh, okay. Do you want to answer something?
Just in response to that, so to give you a context, I have 3.5 pages of questions sitting over on my desk from this evening. So that includes the double page of Graham Lindsay and all of the other questions which came in that you heard through the presentation, and then notes that were left. So I think to pick up on Councillor Bishop's point, I actually think it's a very good suggestion, and it probably aligns to another conversation we've been having potentially after council meetings to think about future agenda items as well. That could be an improvement we put into place to actually discuss that. But obviously, at that scale of questions, we have to, consider which ones within that we would cover off in a report like this versus what might be coming up in other council activities as well. So I'm happy to acknowledge, I think that's a great suggestion, but just want for context to outline what's sitting on my desk over there just from this evening.
Thank you, Chair. And that was going to be my comment, but just to preface it with the fact that we are elected members, and in the democratic world and in the world of transparency, we do invite members of the public to come and talk to us and ask questions of agendas, and I would like to not see any change to that. Perhaps if people, could be more organised, but I think when there are statements, and what's been concerning me is there have been statements that aren't founded in fact, and they sit there unresponded to, and in that vacuum of no response, they could be taken as, or interpreted by people as being factual. So I like the idea of a formal response. My concern is that it will become onerous, but I hope that's something that can be managed within the resourcing.
Yeah, I just want to comment. I think Mr. Lindsay of the Live in Ratepayers Residents Association tonight, that was, to me, totally unhelpful, because I can't recall very much of what he actually said. He went through that many things that quickly. Glad to know that you've captured that. So I just wonder if there's a mechanism where someone's got a number of things to talk about, where they're encouraged to put something on paper, give it to councillors before they actually speak, so we've got chronology you can go through as they're speaking and ask some questions, because that was just totally unhelpful tonight, and sometimes it almost looks grandstanding.
If I can just comment as chair, I find it really difficult to try and interpret what the person is actually trying to say relative to the agenda, whether they've actually got a valid point or whether they're going off down the wrong rabbit hole. And that's, to me, as I've not knowing the individuals, where they're coming from, I find that quite difficult. Now, unfortunately, standing orders is the place to actually have this discussion. And I just wonder, in the interim, well, I think we've got to do that formal response. But my preference as chair would almost to see an outline of what their issues were being submitted before the meeting, so it gives staff, elected members and in the chair, some idea of actually what the issue is, so we can actually provide the information in a timely manner. But I don't want to make it bureaucratic so that the people actually can't come and contribute to the decision making. So that, to me, there's a balance, and I'm going to throw it over to the chief executive to potentially come back to what is the best way of dealing with it, bearing in mind we do actually have standing orders. And in theory, most of the things that we're discussing in the Finance Audit and Risk Committee is for information. So technically, if I wanted to be mean, I could say none of them except for one was probably actually relevant to the decision making tonight. But I don't believe that that is in actually the best interest of the democratic process, of people actually have their ability being heard. So it's a real fine line that one has to tread. And I'm always looking for guidance elsewhere.
So just I agree with that. I agree with Councillor Mason's comments. And it's not, a person comes with, say, one point on the audit paper, you don't expect anything other than just sit and listen, no problem. But when you get something like the Rugby Association tonight, it's just totally unhelpful, and surely there can be a better way of doing that. So, I don't put any onus on someone who just wants to talk about one point. We're not going to make, I would suggest not going to make that harder.
I agree, but I think there is possibly a chance that we could do some more sort of conversations before the meeting to try and understand what these people are going to ask and talk to about. And whether that's my role initially, through Karen probably, to coordinate with her in terms of who they are and what that topic is that they're going to talk, and if it means emailing them and asking for questions or whatever, I mean, I'm more than happy to do that. And you know, just disseminate that information pre the meeting.
Yeah, look, I think I would want to express my support for a broader discussion around standing orders. I think there is some, I don't think we should look at this item, you know, just as a single item. There's some broader issues around, you know, could providing the agenda earlier, making that available earlier, have benefits in terms of allowing people to email in those questions or engage earlier. You know, at the moment there is only that sort of six days that people have got, and usually it's only sort of 2 or 3 business days in order to put that email in with a request for some questions. So all I'm saying is that there might be other pieces to the puzzle. Including maybe we need to consider whether we have a broader public forum, once a quarter or something like that, to actually give people an opportunity to come and share their views outside of an agenda.
All right, I think food for thought. I'll just we'll receive the report if there's no further comment, and look forward to options of I think also endorse the current approach of actually formalising responses where required, and I think the word is where required. I don't want to put a huge workload on staff. I think we need to make it efficient and effective for everybody. Can I have a then mover for the recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Christine. Seconded, Councillor Joe. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. On the speaker. I think we've got an update, a verbal response. We've got a draft audit opinion that arrived by email this afternoon.
It's a draft management letter from our last annual report, so it's quite late from them. We've been chasing it up, but we finally received the draft, so that's for the 1920 annual report. So we'll be tabling that at the next meeting.
The only other question I have is, are we happy that the items that have been completed now come off rather than be? So we've just no objections. They're all complete.
Yep.
Sam?
Sorry, I just had a point around item 21/41, which is marked as complete, which was about the property report. My understanding there was we're going to get a report around the disposals and acquisitions. But I understand we're having a workshop next week, so if we could get a undertaking that the substantive information is going to be presented during that session rather than through a report, I'd be happy to. Yeah.
Okay. So you're happy to move the recommendation on page 145, are you, Sam? Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ross. Any further discussion?
Sorry, there's just one further question I omitted on behalf of Councillor Tukapua, who had to leave earlier. She just had a question to clarify item. What doesn't actually have a number? Sorry, this is the Infrastructure Operations Activity Report on page 148, Levin Wastewater Treatment Plant, the digesters. Her request was just to confirm that matter will be going to the Projects Committee.
So through you, Chair, through you, Chair, I just need to have a chat to the Chair of the Project Steering Group in terms of the agenda for next week, and we have got two items identified that we want to bring back to the that committee, but I also need to just talk to Christina around the terms of reference and just maybe a discussion on that. But certainly the digester would be a very good topic to bring back to the steering group.
Thank you, Councillor Sam. So I've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. With no further business, declare the meeting closed. Thank you for your spirited bidding.